altars have different meanings in the Bible. And one of the first things I want to show you this right here is write it down. Get your pens out, ready to write. Number one, the altar is a place of remembrance. The altar is a place of remembrance. Okay, it's where memories happen. It's where you remember things. That tribe wanted to remember something very important, and they wanted their children, the next generation, to remember something important, because remembering what's important saves you from tragedy down the road. You think about, why is it important to learn history? So that we don't repeat the same mistakes. There's different kinds of altars in the Bible. There's different kinds of altars, but you look at this altar right here. The biggest thing they were looking at was, we want our children to be able to remember things, to remember the Lord. The altar had an importance to the next generation. I wonder if our children today will remember altar experiences in their lives. I wonder if our children today will remember and will take seriously what's important to us. I will tell you right now, yes, they will. Our children of today are affected by our altars today, but also our children of tomorrow are affected by our altars of today. They will remember what's important to us and what we stand for and what we build and what is our legacy. The children of tomorrow will be affected by the altars of today. Turn with me to Jeremiah chapter 17 real quick. Jeremiah, we're in the NIV. Jeremiah 17 verse 1, and we're going to read through verse 2, okay? 1 and 2. Judah's sin is engraved with an iron tool, inscribed with a flint point, on the tablets of their hearts, and on the horns of their what? Altars. Interesting. Even their children remember their altars and Asherah poles beside the spreading trees and on the high hills. Okay. Stop there. The altar, again, is a place of remembrance. Our children of tomorrow are going to be affected by the altars of today. There are two types of altars in the Bible: good altars and bad altars. What kind of altars are we in this generation building for our children? I'm wanting us as a church to really pave the way for the future generation and show them and teach them what it means to remember the Lord. Because they're going to remember something whenever the hard times hit. And when hard times hit, our brains have either been trained to run to the addictions, to run to the problem, to the things that already been giving us the problem in the first place, the circular stuff, or our brains are going to be taught to run to Jesus. And we train so that way it's not just our brains, but it's our heart that's being taught. Our hearts are affected at the altar because the altar, A-L-T-A-R, will alter our destiny, A-L-T-E-R. Amen? I'll say that again. The altar, an altar, experience with God, right? An altar will alter our destiny. And that's our second point today. I'm going to take us to point number 2, because write this down. The altar is a place of future destiny. This is why it's so important for our children to have altar experiences in those moments with God. And yes, it definitely includes these altars right here. I'm going to have an altar call in just a little bit. We're going to spend some time in the altars this morning and just talk to God. Okay, but the altar is in church isn't the only place you can have an altar experience. You can have an altar experience in Sunday school class. You could be sitting in there having an altar experience, and sometimes as we can teach classes, we do different things. You're doing ministry. A lot of you have been teaching for so long and everything, and it's like, oh, am I making a difference? Am I making a difference? Yes, you are. Yes, you are making a difference. Every time you tell a child a memory verse, or you help them memorize a scripture, or you tell them a story about what Jesus did in the Bible, it shows them who Jesus is, who he was, and who he still is today, and who he will be for them if they surrender their life to him. And so it's teaching them, it's training them in righteousness. And you can have altar experiences where they come to Jesus Christ, or they meet him for the first time, or they pray for a need, or they remember how God met a need for them, and it's an altar experience. I remember when I was a kid, I had a beloved dog. Oh, I love this dog so much. I love animals, And this little dog, it was so wonderful, but it was a little bird dog, and it was brown and white. It was just a beautiful dog. It had come through a whole lot of stuff, and so I had this dog with me, and well, one day, to make a long story short, the dog got lost, and we didn't know where it was. It got lost and everything, and so I was a 12-year-old boy, and I thought, oh, you know what, maybe God does answer prayers. I just had enough faith to think, why not, So I wrote my prayer, God, would you please bring my dog back? I really miss him, and I really want my dog, And I wrote that prayer, and I put it on, we had a picnic table outside on the patio. We lived out in the country in Crowley, Texas. We had a little picnic table, wooden, and I put it out there in the middle at nighttime, in the middle of the night, and I put something heavy on top of the prayer. I thought maybe that way I wrote my prayer, and it's reaching up to heaven, and God can look down at it all night long, and Well, the next morning, I wake up, and we're eating our cereal, and having our cinnamon toast and all that stuff, and sitting there at the table, and I was still feeling bummed out and sad and everything. Well, wouldn't you know it, my dog walks up right at that moment, walks up onto the patio area and reaches up to the door and starts like barking and everything. And I'm like, oh my goodness. We thought this dog was long gone. We thought someone stole him. We didn't know where it was. And I'm going to tell you, it had mud all over it. It had like all kinds of mess. It looked like it had been traveling. It looked like it came through the movie Homeward Bound or something. You remember that movie? Yeah. They had a bunch of animal movies when we were kids and stuff that we were watching. I don't know, that was kind of torture. But anyways, it was like he had come through the ringer to make it back home. And I just remember as a child thinking this crazy thought, and that's this: God answered my prayer and brought my dog home. And it's not crazy, I'm being facetious, but it's faith. It was a little win for a little boy who got his little dog back. And I was so impressed by what God did, and I think after that point we named the dog Percy because it means persistence. He was a persistent little dog, and God was a persistent God, and he brought him back, And I was blown away as a little boy. But that prayer, that time of writing that down there, the tabletop, right there on the picnic table, and putting it there before, like where it can reach the heavenlies, that was an altar experience for me. And it taught me that I can have faith in God and that he'll answer my prayers. It doesn't mean that he has to answer every single thing the way we want it. I know there's times in our lives where sometimes God says no, or sometimes God says, hey, not right now, or whatever. Sometimes God answers things in a way that we don't really want him to answer it. We're like, here's the way I want it to work out, God, And God's like, well, you know what? You've got your plans, but I got my plan too. So let me guide you a little bit over here, and then he takes us through a time of waiting or whatever. There's altar times, but I want to tell you right now that the altar is a place of future destiny. It's a place where you hear God's voice. It's a place where even children can experience the Lord. And we as parents and we as grandparents and everybody, we've got to create those moments and those questions and those coaching times and those sit-down times with them. And sometimes you got to pull information out of your kids. I remember when I was a young man, my mom was always able to tell when something was bothering me. Something's not right with you. Let's talk this out. But we've got to create those altar times and altar experiences for our children, and the altar is a place of future destiny. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 3, okay? Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a burning bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. God knows our name. Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Here I am. And God said, do not come any closer. God said that. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. The cost of an altar encounter with God is time, okay? And time in his presence, prayer, okay? Time in prayer. That's the cost. Time in prayer. To have that encounter with God and to stop what we're doing, to listen to the one who is calling our name. I think we're in such a hurry in America, we're in such a hurry in this generation that we don't take time out to get quiet. And because of that, we have an entire generation that's always on. And some of this is affecting us as adults too, by the way. We're always on. Everything's shifted in the past. It's happened so fast over the past 30, 40 years. That's not a lot of time in the history of the planet. But in just 30 years even, maybe 20 even, there's been so much change and everything. When the internet came into play, it was just kind of like websites. You could check out stuff or whatever. You just like, oh, here's information about, this movie or whatever, whatever you're looking up, or encyclopedia or something. But then it's all shifted ever since the onslaught of social media. And social media has created a generation where we're always on. And so subconsciously, we as a generation are always comparing ourselves to everything. We're always like, we have to feel like, I got to say this, I got to say that, I got to look the right way. And already, if our young daughters weren't already having struggles enough before that, now they're really having struggles. I remember when Dove, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, started an onslaught of commercials that were aimed at helping them to not overthink outward beauty, but rather to start looking at inward beauty. I remember that. I remember that there was a push for that. That was even that push started even before social media onslaughts began to happen. And now everybody is always comparing themselves, and it affects females even more than men. But I will say that both men and women are highly susceptible to cultural depression, to cultural acedia, to cultural nihilism, and we as a culture are inundated with having to be always on, always enough, and am I enough? And until we realize that we have got to slow down, stop what we're doing, kick everything to the curb, take time with God, and get into the presence of He who is enough, we'll never be enough. We'll never be enough until He is enough inside of us. And you're going to hear a story right now about Moses, who felt like he wasn't enough. Moses at this point has spent 40 years in Midian. And Moses at this point right here is probably thinking, he's probably been rethinking his life. He was a prince of Egypt, right? Y'all know the story of Moses. I don't have to do too much backstory, okay? But he was a prince of Egypt, and you should read that sometime. But now he's had to flee Egypt because he saw someone who killed or who had raised his hand to beat on one of his fellow brethren, and so one of his fellow countrymen. So he killed that Egyptian, and then he had to flee because, Pharaoh might be after him. And now he's hiding out, and he gets married, and he's working for his father-in-law, and he's just tending sheep. He's tending sheep, and it's in a desert place, and he gets to spend 40 years looking at the backside of a bunch of sheep. Bunch of stinky, smelly sheep. And he's sitting there, and he's like, have I made the right decisions in life? Am I even like, what's going on with my life? And yada, yada, yada. You can imagine Moses at this particular era of his life. And so it's really funny. He's just forgetting about like his destiny. He had a destiny, by the way, to be a leader in Egypt. But he ran away. He thought, man, I'm just going to go do something else because I'm scared now. And so all of a sudden he has this encounter with God, and God says, Moses, Moses. And all of a sudden everything in his life is about to change. Everything in his life is about to stop because he's meeting God. And God says, take off your shoes, for this is holy ground. Take off your shoes. This is holy ground. When someone tells me to take off my shoes, usually it's because they're saying, come on in and stay a while. We need more than a 3-minute kneel down on Sundays. We need an encounter with God every day of our life. And God is saying, I don't want your sandals or your shoes or anything. I don't want 3 or 2 or 1 inch of leather. I don't want anything to come between me and you. And God's saying, I want my presence to surge from this holy ground, surge through you. Sometimes I will literally, if I'm spending time in God's presence, I will literally, sometimes I take the action of removing my shoes. And I know this, I'm not trying to be super spiritual or anything. I'm just saying, I'll mentally say, I'm going to take my shoes off and stay a while for you. Just take my shoes off and walk around and let the holiness of God and the power of God and all the things that he has for us to surge through. Amen? I don't want anything standing in the way between me and you. God is a God of reverence. He is to be revered, but he is also a God of relationship. Someone to be known. And God not only calls out Moses' name here, but he also tells Moses who he is. In the rest of the chapter here, Moses spent some time arguing with God and displaying his doubt. Everybody say doubt, right? Yeah, we don't want doubt, we want faith. But he expressed doubt. He couldn't see past himself to see what God was seeing. God began to put a call on his life. Remember I said your destiny is in the altar, it's found in the altar. Your destiny, who you are, is found in the altar. Well, Moses begins to argue with God whenever God says, hey, I want you to go and deliver my people. I want to deliver them through you. You're going to be the one who goes in there and tells Pharaoh, let my people go. Well, Moses begins to argue and show all this doubt and everything. And God just has to kind of get a hold of him. And let's skip over to chapter 4, verse 1, if you still got Exodus pulled up. Chapter 4. And look at this real quick. Look at verse 1. Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or they don't listen to me? And they say, the Lord did not appear to you. Here's Moses trying to be enough in his own power. Okay? Again, I know we're separated by thousands of years from these people, but they do experience the same insecurities and sense and feelings of inadequacy that we experience today in our lives, guys. Okay? You know what I'm talking about. All of us have struggled with feelings of I'm not good enough, all that stuff. Moses is struggling with this right now. Let's see what happens. Watch. What if they don't believe me or they don't listen to me and they say, the Lord didn't appear to you? Well, then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? What? It's a staff, Lord. I have a staff in my hand. And the Lord said, throw it to the ground. Moses threw it to the ground, and it became a snake. And he ran from it. I would too, especially if it's the Texas rattlesnake. And he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, now reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and he took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. And then watch this. Said the Lord. I love it when God gets culturally relevant. I've seen people on Facebook, they say this right here. I'm going to just drop this right here. Anyways, I'm just messing around with y'all. This right here, God says, so it's so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Wow. Oh my goodness. Let's stop there for a second. I'll let you guys read the rest of that later on your own time. But Moses had spent some time arguing, and then, you got to understand that Moses has just spent all this time in the desert place, and he's been down on himself. I'm just down in life. Everything's just, terrible. He's been experiencing all these feelings of inadequacy and everything, and kind of just been bummed out in life for 40 years or so. And then finally he meets God, and God says, I've got a destiny for you. And God says, I want you to throw your staff. That staff represented everything that Moses had been doing theretofore. That staff had represented Moses' feelings of inadequacy. Moses is just being a sheep herder. It represented, him having to lean on it. It represented all kinds of things. And it represented his identity. The staff was his identity. That's who Moses was. And God says, I want you to throw that identity to the ground and watch this and watch me work. And so Moses, he agrees. He chunks that identity down. He chunks it down, and God turns that into something great. Moses probably thought that his past was too much for God to work around. That sounds like us sometimes, right, guys? And God just says, throw it to the ground. Oh, but God, I can't throw it to the ground. If I throw it to the ground, this is who I am. This is my comfort zone. This is my identity. This is what I've been doing for a long time and everything. Surely you're not going to tell me to just get rid of this and everything. I believe that God was trying to tell Moses, it's not about what's in our hands. It's about whose hands we're in. It's about whose hands we are in. We are in God's hands. And while Moses' staff represented the limits, God's saying, I want you to throw that identity. I want you to throw that staff to the ground and watch the God who is limitless do something powerfully amazing. What is God asking us to throw to the ground, I ask myself when I read this? What is God asking Corbyn to throw to the ground? Are there things that we as people lean on without really even realizing it or recognizing it and stuff? And God just saying, look, I want you to chunk this thing to the ground and let me do something amazing with you. God gave Moses, in that moment, a new destiny and a new identity. And Moses went from being the leader of sheep to being the leader of a nation. He had to throw his old self down. And even then, he still argued a little bit. Moses is like, well, I'll never be able to be a mouthpiece. I stutter too much. It's like God finally said, okay, fine, I'll meet you in the middle on that one. Here, Aaron, your brother, you can speak through Aaron, or I'll speak through Aaron or whatever. He'll help you out. And that's fine. Sometimes God gives us help. Sometimes God gives us different things that equip us. But my point is that ultimately, God gave Moses a brand new destiny, and it was at the altar of the burning bush. That burning bush became an altar experience for Moses because it altered his life, and it was a place where he remembered forever that God is the one who's driving my life. I'm not in control anymore. I'm throwing down my control. I'm going to stop trying to be the master of my little universe, and I'm going to let God be the one who's in control.